own family. Dad-perfectrevenge. The knife pressed against my daughter's throat drew a thin line of blood as my son-in-law screamed threats at the SWAT team surrounding us in my own basement. 15,000 people were watching this live on the internet, and I was the one who'd set up the cameras. 3 days ago, I was just a confused old man who thought he was losing his mind. But let me back up and tell you how I went from nearly being poisoned to death to becoming the architect of the most elaborate revenge plot I've ever engineered. My name is Howard Phillips. I'm 65 years old, and until last week, I thought I was going crazy. It started on a Tuesday morning at the breakfast table in my brownstone in Brooklyn. The smell of bacon usually made me hungry, but lately the mere scent of food made my stomach turn. My hands were trembling as I tried to lift my coffee cup. I'd been a structural engineer for 40 years, building bridges that could withstand hurricanes and earthquakes. I could calculate load-bearing capacity in my head and spot structural flaws from 50 yards away. Yet now I could barely hold a ceramic mug without spilling coffee all over myself. Marcus Chen, my son-in-law, walked into the dining room. He didn't say good morning. He never really looked me in the eye anymore. He looked through me like I was a piece of old furniture he wanted to throw out but couldn't quite figure out how to dispose of. He tossed a blue envelope onto the mahogany table I'd built myself 30 years ago. It slid across the polished wood and stopped right next to my trembling hand. "You're going to Florida tomorrow, Howard," he said. He didn't ask. He didn't suggest. He ordered me like I was some kind of employee. I looked up at him. Marcus was 38 years old, with that confident smile of a man who'd never had to work for anything substantial in his life. He called himself an insurance adjuster, but in the 5 years he'd been married to my daughter Beverly, I'd never actually seen him adjust much of anything except his spending habits. He just spent money. He spent Beverly's salary from her interior design business, and lately he'd been spending my patience thin as paper. "Florida?" I asked, my voice sounding weak and raspy. I hated how I sounded these days, like an old man on his deathbed. Why would I need to go to Florida? "Because you need professional care," Marcus said, pouring himself a tall glass of orange juice from my refrigerator. He always helped himself to everything in my house like he owned the place. "Dr. Hayes said your little episode last week was a warning sign. The humidity down there will be good for your joints. I booked you into a nice assisted living resort in Orlando, one-way ticket, first class. You'll love it." I picked up the ticket with my shaking fingers. One way, he wasn't sending me on vacation. He was shipping me out like damaged goods. I looked across the table at Beverly, my beautiful daughter. She was 35 years old, talented, smart as a whip when it came to design work. But right now, she was sitting there staring into her bowl of oatmeal like it contained the secrets of the universe. She wouldn't look at me. She knew exactly what this was, and it wasn't a vacation. "Beverly," I said softly, trying to catch her eye, "do you think this is a good idea?" She flinched like I'd slapped her. It was a small movement, but I'd been watching people's reactions to stress loads for 4 decades. I knew when someone was about to crack under pressure. She finally looked up, and her eyes were filled with tears she was desperately trying to hold back. "Daddy, it's for your own good," she said, but her voice sounded rehearsed, like she'd been practicing these lines in the mirror. "Marcus says you need professional monitoring. We can't watch you around the clock. You're getting confused lately. You forgot to turn off the stove yesterday, and last week you left the front door wide open all night." That was a lie, and I knew it. I'd been an engineer for 4 decades. Precision and attention to detail weren't just my job, they were my survival instinct. You don't build bridges that carry thousands of cars every day by being forgetful. But lately, strange things had been happening around the house. My keys would go missing and turn up in bizarre places. The stove would be left on when I was certain I'd turned it off. My wallet appeared in the refrigerator one morning, and this constant sickness, this dizziness and nausea that made me feel like I was standing on a bridge during a windstorm. Dr. Hayes, Marcus's golfing buddy, had dismissed it all as normal aging. "You're 65, Howard," he'd said during my last appointment. "Your body is just slowing down. These little memory lapses are completely normal." But my body had never felt normal about anything that was actually wrong. "Fine," I said, setting down my coffee cup harder than necessary. "I'll go to Florida." The relief that washed over Marcus's face was immediate and insulting. He actually smiled and reached over to pat my shoulder with his heavy, condescending hand. "That's the spirit, Howard. You go pack your bags. The car service will be here at 8 a.m. sharp. Don't worry about anything here. Beverly and I will take excellent care of your house." "I'll bet you will," I thought. I went upstairs to my bedroom, but I didn't pack for Florida. I packed for war. See, here's what Marcus didn't understand about engineers. We don't just build things, we think 5 steps ahead of everyone else. We calculate for worst-case scenarios. We plan for structural failures before they happen. And when something doesn't add up, we investigate until we find the weak point in the system. I'd been feeling like something was fundamentally wrong with my house, not the building, but the people living in it, and that feeling had nothing to do with old age. I packed one suitcase with clothes for Florida, just in case someone was watching. But in my old surveying kit, I packed the tools I was really going to need. A small digital recorder, binoculars, pH testing strips left over from a water quality project I'd worked on in the 80s, and my old Polaroid camera, the kind that leaves no digital trace. The next morning, I played my part perfectly. I let Marcus load my suitcases into the trunk of the black sedan he'd ordered. He hugged me goodbye, and it felt like being embraced by a snake. His smile was all teeth and no warmth. "Don't worry about the house, Howard," he said, looking up at the brownstone I'd spent 25 years restoring. "We'll take good care of everything." "I bet you will," I thought again. I got into the back seat and watched them wave from the front porch. My grandfather had bought this land in 1952 with money he'd saved working double shifts at the Navy Yard. My father had poured the foundation with his own hands. I'd restored every brick, every piece of trim, every window. The house was worth close to $1.8 million now, sitting in a rapidly gentrifying neighborhood. And looking at Marcus's face as he waved goodbye, I could see he wasn't looking at a family home. He was looking at a winning lottery ticket. As soon as the car turned the corner and we were out of sight, I leaned forward to the driver. "Change of plans," I said, pulling a crisp $100 bill out of my wallet. "Don't take me to JFK, take me to 4th Street instead." The driver, a middle-aged guy who'd probably seen Stranger Requests, looked at the money and shrugged. "Your call, buddy." He made a U-turn at the next light. 4th Street ran parallel to my block, about 200 yards away. The back windows of the old tenement buildings on 4th Street had a perfect view of the front of my house. I'd found a room for rent on Craigslist using an old email address that Marcus didn't know existed. It wasn't much, just a tiny studio in a building that had seen better decades. But it had the one thing I needed most, a clear line of sight to my front door. I paid the driver and dragged my suitcase up 3 flights of creaking stairs. My legs felt like lead and my heart was hammering so hard I thought it might give out. The room I'd rented was about as appealing as a prison cell. It smelled like stale cigarettes, damp carpet, and 40 years of broken dreams. The wallpaper was peeling, the radiator clanked like a machine shop, and there was a suspicious stain on the ceiling that I didn't want to investigate. But it had one perfect feature, the window. I walked over and pulled back the grimy curtain. There it was, my house, my life, my legacy, sitting directly across the street like a beautiful woman in a den of thieves. From this angle, I could see the front door, the living room windows, and the master bedroom balcony, where Margaret and I used to drink coffee and watch the sunrise. I opened my suitcase and pulled out my old military-grade binoculars, the ones I'd used for surveying bridge sites back when my hands were steady and my eyes were sharp. I pulled up the room's only chair, a wobbly thing that had probably been new during the Reagan administration, and settled in to watch. For hours, nothing happened. The house looked peaceful, normal, like the perfect American dream. But I had a feeling in my gut that I hadn't experienced since I was walking inspection lines on suspension bridges during high winds. You know that feeling when you can sense that something is structurally unsound, even though everything looks fine on the surface? The foundation was shifting, and something was about to snap. Around 4 in the afternoon, I heard movement in the hallway outside my door. The building was old, and sound carried like whispers in a cathedral. I cracked my door open to get some air because the room was stifling, and standing there in the dim hallway was Dorothy Sullivan. Dorothy was 75 years old, sharp as a steel beam, and she'd lived in this neighborhood since before it had a name. She knew every secret, every scandal, every family history within a 10-block radius. She was the kind of woman who noticed when your mail was being delivered to the wrong address or when your newspaper stopped coming. Nothing got past Dorothy Sullivan. She was standing there holding a paper bag of groceries, looking at me like she'd been expecting to see me all along. She didn't seem surprised to find Howard Phillips, owner of the finest house on the block, hiding in a roach motel across the street from his own front door. "I knew you weren't as stupid as you've been acting lately, Howard," she said, her voice rough as sandpaper but somehow comforting. "Mrs. Sullivan," I started to explain, but she held up one weathered hand to stop me. "Save your breath, honey. You look terrible. Your skin is gray and you've lost at least 20 pounds in the past month. I feel terrible," I admitted, leaning against the door frame for support. The dizziness was getting worse. She walked over to me and took my hand in both of hers. Her grip was surprisingly strong for a woman her age. She pressed something cold and jagged into my palm. I looked down and saw a rusty iron key, old and heavy. "That opens the old service gate in your back alley," she whispered, glancing left and right down the empty hallway like she was sharing state secrets. "The one your wife Margaret used to use when she was tending her herb garden. God rest her soul." "Why are you giving me this, Mrs. Sullivan?" She stepped closer and I could see genuine fear in her eyes, something I'd never seen from this tough old bird in all the years I'd known her. "Because you need to see what's happening in your own house. Howard, you need to get close. Your dog Buster didn't die of old age last week like that son-in-law of yours told you." My blood turned to ice water. Buster had been my German Shepherd, 8 years old and healthy as a horse. Marcus had found him dead in the backyard 5 days ago and said his heart had just given out. Happens to big dogs all the time. He'd said while arranging for the cremation, "Nothing we could do. What do you know about Buster?" I demanded, gripping Dorothy's arm harder than I meant to. She pulled away gently but firmly. "I can't say everything here, Howard. These old buildings have thin walls, and that husband of Beverly's has been asking an awful lot of questions about who's been watching your house. But you take that key. Tonight when it gets dark, you use it. Go to the back garden and wait in those hydrangea bushes by the kitchen window." She started to walk toward her apartment, then stopped and looked back at me with an expression that chilled me to the bone. "At midnight, Howard. At midnight, you're going to see something that will explain everything. And God help you when you do, because once you know the truth, there's no going back to pretending everything is normal." She disappeared into her apartment with a soft click of the lock, leaving me standing in that dim hallway holding a rusty key and feeling like the ground was shifting beneath my feet. I went back to my window and raised the binoculars again. The sun was starting to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Streetlights began flickering on one by one. My house looked warm and inviting from the outside. Golden light spilled from the living room windows, and I could see the silhouettes of people moving around inside. It looked like the perfect picture of domestic happiness, but as the hours ticked by, I started noticing things that didn't add up. At 9 p.m., a white van pulled up to my curb. 2 men in black t-shirts got out and started unloading heavy cases from the back. They weren't moving furniture or delivering appliances. Whatever was in those cases required 2 people to carry, and they moved with the efficiency of professionals who'd done this before. At 10 p.m., the expensive cars started arriving. A red Ferrari, a black Lamborghini, 2 silver BMWs, and a Bentley that cost more than most people's houses. They parked along the street with the casual arrogance of people who didn't care about fire hydrants, bus stops, or anyone else's convenience. I watched Marcus open my front door to greet these people. He wasn't wearing his usual khakis and polo shirt. Tonight he was dressed in a black tuxedo that fit him like it had been custom made. He shook hands with the men getting out of those cars like he was the mayor welcoming visiting dignitaries. He looked confident, powerful, like he owned the world. And then I saw Beverly. My heart broke into pieces right there in that grimy little room. She was standing in the doorway wearing a red dress that was far too short and far too tight, but she wasn't greeting guests as the lady of the house. She was working. She had a tray in her hands and she was moving between the cars taking drink orders like a cocktail waitress. I checked my watch, 11:30 p.m. Dorothy's words echoed in my head like a warning bell. At midnight, you're going to see something that will explain everything. I grabbed the rusty key and my binoculars. I left that miserable room and ran down those stairs as fast as my weakened legs would carry me. I crossed the dark alleyway that separated our streets, my legs feeling like rubber and my chest burning with every breath. The arsenic, though, I didn't know that's what it was yet, had been slowly poisoning my system for weeks. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely fit the rusty key into the lock of the old iron gate that was hidden behind 30 years of ivy growth. The lock groaned and clicked. I slipped inside my own backyard like a burglar. I crept through the shadows of the garden Margaret had spent 20 years perfecting, past the rose bushes she'd planted for our anniversary, past the herb garden where she'd grown basil and rosemary, past the little stone bench where we used to sit and plan our retirement. Everything looked the same, but it felt different. It felt violated. I made my way to the thick hydrangea bushes that grew right under the living room window. The music was loud now, not party music, but something with a heavy bass that vibrated through the walls of my house. I crouched down in the dirt and raised myself up slowly, inch by inch, until I could see through the gap in the velvet curtains. What I saw stopped my heart completely. My living room was gone. The furniture Margaret and I had collected over 30 years of marriage, the antique sofa, the hand-carved coffee table, the Persian rug her mother had given us as a wedding gift, all of it had been pushed against the walls or removed entirely. In the center of the room were 3 green felt tables, 2 roulette wheels, and enough poker chips to fill a casino vault. This wasn't a party. This was a high-stakes, illegal gambling operation running right out of my living room. Cigar smoke filled the air so thick I could see it swirling in the light from my chandelier. Men in expensive suits were shouting and laughing, throwing stacks of cash onto the tables like they were playing with Monopoly money. I watched a man spill red wine on Margaret's Persian rug and not even look down. He just kept betting, but that wasn't what made me nearly faint. I shifted my gaze to the fireplace and my world collapsed. Above the mantel where Margaret's portrait had hung for 15 years, there was now a large digital screen displaying betting odds and casino games. And leaning against the brick fireplace, waiting to be used as kindling, was the ornate frame that had held my wife's painting. The canvas had been torn right down the middle, splitting Margaret's face in half. I felt a sharp pain in my chest like someone had driven a spike through my ribcage. My vision blurred and the world started spinning. The last thing I remember seeing clearly was Marcus standing on top of my dining room table, the solid oak table where we'd shared Thanksgiving dinners for decades. He was holding something gold up to the light, and men were shouting numbers at him. It was my grandfather's pocket watch collection. The watches he'd given me when I graduated engineering school, the timepieces I'd planned to pass down to Beverly's children someday, and Marcus was auctioning them off to a room full of criminals like they were garage sale trinkets. I hit the ground hard. When I woke up, I was lying on Dorothy Sullivan's floral couch, and she was sitting in her rocking chair watching me with the patience of a woman who'd seen enough tragedy to know when someone's world had just been shattered. She didn't ask how I felt. Instead, she reached into her apron pocket and tossed a small amber glass bottle onto the coffee table between us. It spun once and stopped right in front of my face. The label had been scraped off, but I could see traces of adhesive where it used to be. "Where did you get this?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "I pulled it out of your kitchen garbage 2 days ago," she said, her voice calm as death. "I saw that son-in-law of yours in your backyard at 2 in the morning, scraping the label off with a knife before he buried it deep in the trash bin under the coffee grounds and banana peels." I picked up the bottle with trembling fingers. It was small, maybe 2 ounces, and there was still a tiny bit of white residue clinging to the bottom. "It's arsenic, Howard. Low dose, administered over weeks. Just enough to make your hands shake so you can't sign important documents. Just enough to make you confused so you doubt your own memory. Just enough to make you look like a senile old man who needs to be put in a home. But not enough to kill you quickly, because if you died too fast, there would be an autopsy." The room started spinning again, but this time it wasn't from the poison. It was from the rage. "He wants you weak and compliant," Dorothy continued. "He wants you signing papers you can't read and agreeing to things you don't understand. He wants you out of that house so he can do whatever he's been planning." I thought about all the symptoms I'd been experiencing. The nausea, the tremors, the confusion, the memory lapses that Dr. Hayes had dismissed as normal aging. None of it was normal. It was attempted murder in slow motion. "I have to call the police," I said. Reaching for my phone, Dorothy moved faster than I thought possible for a 75-year-old woman. She grabbed my wrist and held it with surprising strength. "Stop and think, Howard. Use that engineer brain of yours. What happens when you call the police right now?" I looked at her confused. They show up and see a sick old black man claiming his successful white son-in-law is poisoning him. Your only proof is an old bottle from the trash and the word of an elderly neighbor. Marcus will say you're having delusions. He'll say the arsenic bottle was old rat poison you forgot you had. He'll have Dr. Hayes sign papers saying you're mentally incompetent. And while you're arguing with skeptical cops, he'll be cleaning out that casino and destroying any evidence that it ever existed. She was right, and I knew it. The bitter truth was harder to swallow than the poison had been. You need proof, Howard. Real proof. You need to catch him in the act with evidence that can't be explained away. I spent the next 2 hours drinking Dorothy's strong black coffee and eating dry toast to settle my poisoned stomach. By 7 a.m., I had a plan. Not just any plan, an engineer's plan, with contingencies and fail-safes. I walked back across the street to my house. The sun was shining like nothing had happened. The luxury cars were gone. The street was quiet. I used my key to enter through the front door, and immediately the smell hit me, industrial bleach, so strong it burned my nostrils. The house was spotless. The gambling tables had vanished. The furniture was back in its exact original positions. Even Margaret's portrait was hanging over the fireplace again, though I could see the faint line where they'd taped the torn canvas back together. Marcus and Beverly were in the kitchen eating pancakes like it was just another normal Tuesday morning. When Marcus saw me, his fork froze halfway to his mouth. For just a second, I saw raw terror in his eyes, the look of a man seeing a ghost he thought was safely buried. "Howard," he stammered, standing so fast his chair scraped against the tile floor. "You're back. We thought you were on the plane. We missed you so much." I forced my face into a mask of confusion and fatigue. "I missed my flight, I lied, and I forgot my heart medication. I need to rest." I walked past them without another word, leaving them standing there terrified that their victim had somehow survived. Over the next 48 hours, I became someone I'd never been before. I stopped being the trusting father and became a structural engineer conducting a failure analysis. And what I found was a foundation rotten to the core. Using skills I'd learned from 40 years of surveying construction sites, I began installing my own surveillance system. I had a drawer full of old equipment from my engineering days. Tiny recording devices I'd used to monitor stress points on bridges, miniature cameras for inspecting hard-to-reach structural elements. I installed a pinhole camera in the smoke detector above the kitchen island where Marcus made his phone calls. I hid a digital recorder inside the base of the table lamp in the living room. I even rigged a motion sensor in the basement to alert my phone if anyone went down there. Marcus had no idea he was being watched by someone who'd spent decades identifying structural weaknesses. I also started testing everything I ate and drank. I had pH strips and chemical testing kits left over from water quality projects in the 1980s. Every morning, I'd test my coffee, my orange juice, even my toothpaste. The readings were off the charts for metallic contamination, but I needed more than proof of poisoning. I needed to catch Marcus in the act of something that couldn't be explained away. The breakthrough came on Thursday night. I was pretending to sleep when I heard Marcus pacing in the kitchen talking on the phone to someone he called Leonard. I had my recorder running, and every word came through crystal clear. "This old man is tougher than leather," Marcus was saying, his voice filled with frustration. "I thought he'd be dead or in a facility by now. The arsenic isn't working fast enough. Don't worry, Leonard. I'm doubling the dose starting tonight. He won't make it to the weekend." I had him. Premeditated attempted murder, recorded in his own voice. But Marcus wasn't done talking. "Once his brain turns to mush, I'm dumping him in that state-run facility in the Bronx. The one with the health code violations. He won't last a month there. Then Beverly inherits everything, and you get your money." My blood turned to ice. Leonard wasn't just a friend. He was a loan shark, and Marcus owed him serious money. My house, Margaret's house, my grandfather's investment, my life's work was collateral for Marcus's gambling debts. The next morning, Marcus tried to serve me wine with dinner. I pretended to drink it, but I'd sewn an absorbent liner into my napkin. I spit the poisoned wine into the fabric and saved it as evidence. That afternoon, I called my real doctor, Dr. Michael Hayes, and demanded an emergency blood test. The results came back within hours. Lethal levels of arsenic in my system. Enough to kill a horse, but administered slowly enough to mimic the symptoms of dementia. I also called my wife's old lawyer, Patricia Coleman. She was 70 years old, sharp as a razor, and she'd helped Margaret set up her will. When I explained what was happening, she didn't waste time with sympathy. "We're going to destroy him legally," she said. "But first, we need to set a trap." Patricia helped me transfer ownership of my house into a revocable trust with the paperwork time-stamped and notarized at 3:18 a.m. while Marcus was sleeping. By the time Marcus woke up, the house legally wasn't mine anymore. It belonged to the Margaret Phillips Memorial Trust. Marcus had no idea. He spent Friday morning on the phone with banks trying to set up a loan against my property. He'd forged a power of attorney document giving himself control over my assets. He thought he was hours away from cashing in on $1.8 million. When the bank called him Friday afternoon to tell him the collateral didn't exist, I was recording everything from my hidden camera in the smoke detector. Marcus lost his mind. He screamed at the bank manager. He threw his phone against the wall. He called Leonard in a panic, begging for more time. That's when he crossed the line from fraud into violence. Friday night, Leonard and his crew showed up at my house. But by then, I'd already triggered the silent alarm I'd installed, one that went directly to Sheriff Benjamin Rodriguez's personal phone. I'd also set up live streaming cameras broadcasting to Facebook and YouTube. When Marcus grabbed Beverly and held a knife to her throat in my basement, 15,000 people were watching it happen in real time. When Leonard's thugs broke down my door, the entire internet could see their faces. The SWAT team arrived within 6 minutes. A police sniper took Marcus down with a shoulder shot from the backyard. No one died, but justice was served with surgical precision. Marcus got life in prison without parole for attempted murder, kidnapping, elder abuse, and running an illegal gambling operation. Beverly got 12 years as an accessory. She'd known about the poisoning and said nothing. I sold the house and bought a 40-foot RV. Dorothy and I hit the road together, two old warriors who'd survived the same war. People tell you that family is everything. They're wrong. Family is the person who hands you a rusty key when you're locked out of your own life. Family is the person who saves evidence in your trash and calls the police when you can't. I spent 40 years building bridges, but the most important lesson I learned was this. The most dangerous structural failures happen in your own foundation. When someone is poisoning your peace, even if they share your last name, you have to cut them loose before the whole structure collapses. Trust is earned through action, not inherited through blood. And sometimes the strongest thing you can build is the courage to tear down what's trying to destroy you. If you're over 50 and someone is trying to convince you that you're losing it, trust your instincts first, not their explanations, because predators count on your self-doubt to make their lies believable. The skills that made you successful in your career, whether it's engineering, teaching, or running a business, don't expire when you retire. They become your secret weapons when life tries to tear you down.